Thank you so much this afternoon for joining us to talk around the subject of health and wellbeing. By way of introduction, my name's Adam Mason. I'm the Consultancy Director here at Benefex, so responsible for our client delivery teams. And I'm joined by
David Palman. I'm one of the strategic consultants. I work with a number of clients, been in the industry now for 11 years.
Okay, so I've given it a slightly ambiguous title of joining the dots, but I guess what we're really going to talk about today is that piece around navigating what is an incredibly complex world. So I guess in terms of a little bit of a scene set, we've spoken at previous forums about the abundance of systems that exist, and actually many employees have, on average 29 different logins for platforms that they're needing to access day to day. And actually, we are one of the worst proponents of that in HR. There are so many different HR platforms out there, and actually there's a real opportunity for us to start bringing that together. And when we think particularly about health and well-being, there are so many different areas of the business where actually we might be promoting what our health and well-being activities are. So you think about the intranet. I meet very few businesses that describe themselves as having a great intranet. Their success has also been their failure in terms of their ability to hold lots and lots of information. But when you actually want to find something of relevance, it's quite difficult to find out where that sits. You've then got the piece around, it might be tucked away in an induction pack. But for an employee who's been with an organisation for 5 years, actually being able to think back to that period of time when they joined and it was mentioned by their line manager is quite challenging. The line manager itself may not be delivering the message in the same way as another line manager somewhere else in the organisation. We've got the piece around actually, is occupational health as connected with HR as it should be to be able to deliver the key messages that it's got. And something like a staff handbook, you can try and make it a bit more jazzy, but actually it tends to be quite a dour document. So actually, where there are really key messages that you're trying to draw out in that document, it's quite hard to do. You can imagine I had great fun when I was looking on the internet trying to find the perfect picture here. But what I really wanted to try and draw out is if you imagine in each of your organisations, you will have lots of different people who will be undertaking health and wellbeing activities. And in their own rights, they'll have some impact. But actually, it's only when you begin to join the dots that actually the line in this particular case starts to have that much more meaningful message, because everything is pushing in that congruent direction and nothing is conflicting or opposing. And particularly when you think about health and well-being, I guess the key thing to think about is it's very much linked to people. So that it could be, it's vulnerable in its nature because it could be about myself, it could be about my family, it could be about my children, it could be about my friends, but it's actually quite a difficult subject matter to talk around just because of the personal nature of it. And because of that, actually, the way in which we deliver content around well-being needs to be even more tailored, because it needs to be sincere, it needs to be authentic, and it needs to be relevant to the individuals. So I guess historically what we've seen is a proliferation of products out there in the marketplace, everyone promising to try and be the cure to health and well-being, or certainly a large component of that strategy. And for some of the more progressive organisations, we've started to see them begin to bring them together. So that piece around actually making them more aligned and joined up in the approach that they're looking to do. And I guess if we look at what that actually means, so that was the birth of Flex to some extent, the ability to give an employee choice. That's choice to be able to change the cover that I've got, to perhaps cover a family member, to expand the level of cover that I've got, or just to make that distinction between whether I want something like critical illness or whether I want income protection. But we have actually seen, particularly if you look globally, certain markets start to embrace the idea of flexibility and choice even more. So looking at somewhere like Asia, spending accounts are particularly prevalent, and they're effectively the ability to give an employee the chance to get reimbursement for some of their healthcare costs. And it's certainly not been ruled out in the same way as we've seen auto-enrolment in the UK, and that requirement to almost have matched funding exist. As the dependency on the state is reduced, actually we could start to see health and well-being moving in that direction, where employers start to provide some form of matching. And something that we've seen very much take off in Asia may have some relevance in the economies closer to home. So we've seen a progression. I talked about the piece around kind of products and them just sitting in isolation, and then actually trying to bring them together with a bit more of a joined up approach. But I think what we've really started to see more and more our clients look to do is actually build that content, that story, that wraparound. And the idea being, and we've talked a lot about this in the past, but it's this idea of learn, plan, do. So the idea of educating an employee on a subject matter, giving them the ability to then take steps to plan their next move, but then also crucially giving them a route to actually take action. So if we think about something like pension saving, giving them an awareness of the tax efficiencies that exist, making them aware of what their limits are and how that might relate to them, but then crucially giving them the mechanism to be able to manage their pension contributions or invest their funds in a slightly different way. And actually the interaction can be quite small, but it's then how do you build them up into this really meaningful experience where lots of small activities actually start to have a lasting impact on organisations. Because one of my frustrations, without a shadow of a doubt, is when I hear speakers talk about financial or health and well-being, is it's almost got to the point where it's overcomplicated, to the point where it frightens people off making that next step. Because you almost feel like you need to have this 30-page document that summarises all key aspects of what you're going to do over the next 5 years. And actually there are some really meaningful steps that organisations can take to start almost proving out some of their theories and start working on as part of that roadmap, rather than waiting for everything to come together in one go. So I guess in terms of what we've really tried to do with OneHub, one of the key things for us, I talked about that sincere and authentic message. It's this opportunity to create personalisation. Particularly around something like well-being, it needs to feel relevant to me, it needs to feel personal to me, and it can't be lost. We also want to use the data that we've got within our organisations to make it really relevant and targeted to the individuals that it's going to. So if we think about something like pension savings, for example, there will be different messages that we want to get out to different demographics within the organisation. For those that perhaps the graduates that have just exited from their university with a significant debt, actually there's a piece around actually how do they think about pension as not an optional thing, but something that's very relevant to them even at an early age. But actually, as you're nearing retirement, it's thinking about have you actually got the funds available to you to be able to give you the quality of life that you want and the quality of life that you're expecting. So we can but what we can effectively look to do is target very different messages. So rather than it being generalist and some content being relevant for me and some content not being relevant for me, it feels targeted, it feels relevant to me as an individual. It's then about connecting content. So I go back to my lion to some extent, that piece around making sure that what occupational health and what HR and reward teams are doing are joined up. And actually, if we're all pushing in the same direction, the opportunity for what we're doing to be a success is much more prevalent. And everyone I'm speaking to wants to do more digitally. A lot of that is to do with the fact that organisations are increasingly disparate by virtue of the fact that global markets are expanding and expanding. Whereas before HR may have had an opportunity to be able to interact on that personal level, what we really want to do with technology is still give that personal execution, but recognise that actually being able to do face-to-face workshops in lots of different locations across the globe is a huge drain on time, but also a huge drain on resource. And I guess the last thing, the team that we work with here within Benefex spend a lot of time looking at the brand that we create as part of the Flex platforms. And actually, it's a thing that we're immensely proud of in terms of what it looks and feels like. So given that it's something that we see as a success, how can we use that brand that people already know and trust to deliver, as I say, some really key messages to our employees?
Thanks. So, as Adam said, with regards to that disconnect, what we're starting to see a lot more of is clients actually using OneHub to draw out some of that wider parts of the proposition to highlight and push those back to employees. So that could be something as simple as using the existing total reward statement to highlight some of the softer extrinsic things that make up part of that employee value proposition, such as free fruit in the office or access to a mortgage advisor. It could be using the brochure to pull out, again, some of those, although they may not be transactional elements, but again, any other items that are employer funded. So it's that pushed message out to employees around this is what makes part of that employer proposition. Or it could be through the use of virtual pages, which is what we're seeing a lot more of from clients at the moment. Now, virtual pages or content pages are incredibly flexible. For example, we can embed video content within these, and so if you had, say, like an occupational health team, we could have somebody from that team talking about their role within the business and how they can support well-being. So something that you might not be able to find unless you're 7 pages deep into the intranet, we can again bring that to the surface in a format that's accessible for everybody. Similarly, for one of our clients, we actually have a number of testimonials within one of these virtual pages where we have a number of their internal champions, and again, that kind of testimonial piece where it's your peers talking to you about what's going on is so powerful. And they're talking about all aspects of well-being that are available within the company and how well they feel supported when using some of those. And similarly, like Adam said before, it could just be about bringing some of those existing things to the fore, so links to intranet pages or links out to provider pages. And what I've been doing a lot of over the last 12 months is having whiteboarding sessions with clients where we go through what's currently promoted and what isn't currently being promoted, and certainly what's in column B, how do we further promote these types of things. So, for example, one of my clients at the moment is about to go live with a set of financial wellbeing pages in a similar kind of format to this. And so as part of that, we had an initial discussion around what's currently in place, where do you want to get to, and how can we kind of achieve that. So looking at the existing products, what can we add, what value adds can we put in here. So we landed on a number of different products that I just want to talk to you about very briefly. So the first of those was ClearScore, directing employees to that website where they can access their credit score, have a look at their credit report, and try and drive some of that behavioural change around what should I be doing to further increase my credit score, what sort of things should I be kind of keeping an eye out for. Similarly, there's an app called Moneybox, which we're directing employees to. So for those of you who don't know how that works, essentially you link one of your accounts to Moneybox and it will round up any transaction to the nearest pound. So say something costs £1.75, that 25 pence there will get rounded up to £2, and that 25 pence will be invested for you. And you've got full control over where that gets invested and your access to that money as well. And then another one of the products we're looking at, which is one of my favourites, is Money Dashboard. Now, this is a product where you can you link all of your kind of accounts, your current accounts, credit card accounts, any loans. It has got bank level security. You load all that information in, and it throws out a whole bunch of information about your transactions. So it shows you all your full transactional history. It'll group them into certain categories, so you can see, you know, what types of categories do I spend the most money. And there's things like there. You can there's a lot of budget planning tools around there. Now, I looked at the budget planner when I actually did this myself, and the first thing it talks to you about before it starts planning is looking at regular transactions and repeat transactions. And it says, here's a list of your regular transactions that we see every month. We want to use these as a basis to plan your budget. Is this okay? And you have a look through them. And for me, it was all the standard stuff you'd expect. So rent coming out, electricity, council tax, that sort of thing. And then at the bottom, I had £20 to Sky Bet. And I was like, that told me two things. One, if that's happening every month, I'm terrible at it. And two, I've got to be smart with my money. So initially, before I'd even started any of the budget planning, it threw that flag up for me and got me thinking a little bit more around, what I'm doing with my money. So once you've got the products and you have these kind of schemes in place and a number of products to kind of like create that kind of well-being offering, how do we communicate this out? Because you could have the best products in the world, it's like with anything, but if nobody knows about it, what's the point? So what we're seeing a lot more of is clients working on these kind of content-centric campaigns. And again, it's about educating employees around what's currently out there, what we've put in place, why is this relevant for you, and then a call to action for the employee as well. So again, it's reiterating that learn, plan, do engagement loop. Now, we can segment the communications. We can send communications out to all employees or to a select number of employees. For example, a lot of you are probably talking to employees at the moment about the childcare voucher changes. And obviously, we are coming up to the last point where people can join the existing CCV scheme before TFC comes into play for everybody. And through the use of the Benefex Communication Manager, not only can we use the data that we've got for our clients to segment those populations, it also means that we can look at the engagement side of that as well. So we can see who's opening these emails, who's clicking through to the links on the other side of it. And we can analyse that data to essentially track the success of campaigns, but also use that to plan campaigns in the future so that we get better and better each time and it becomes really laser targeted every time we do one of these campaigns. Now, looking at just this one on the board as an example, you've got on the left-hand side here, apologies, you definitely won't be able to read this at the back, the promotion of ISA limits. So, for example, this is saying February, so ahead of the end of the financial year, we might push out a message to employees saying, don't forget the ISA limit is about to renew, so make sure that you make the most of whatever is left in that kind of savings piece there. And at the other end of the scale, looking more at mental health, what we saw in October last year as part of mental health awareness and the week kind of dedicated to that was a lot of our clients are now actually starting to push out kind of daily emails around that. Benefex included, we had some great things going on in the office. And again, it's highlighting not only, so for some clients we actually had testimonials for people where they felt supported by their employer. A lot of the time it was just talking about the different sort of services that are available as well. So again, we can use that, using the data and using that communications manager to really kind of support those campaigns that we put in place. So as an example of one of those communications that we released, this is a pension communication one of our clients put out, and this was specifically targeted to young people, millennials, to get them thinking about their pension. And it was less about the product of the pension, but more around how can this work for me? So why should I be thinking about pension right now? And if I want to retire on X, then I need to be putting in Y at this point in time. So again, it was targeting that communication out to employees. And again, with things like this, you can embed video in it. So if you wanted to push out a message around some upcoming changes, for example, the AE phasing changes that are coming into play, and communicate that out to the wider audience, you can do. Similarly, with something like a session like today, for example, which is being recorded, you wouldn't have been able to get this kind of interaction unless it was in this kind of like face-to-face environment. But now we can record these sessions and put them up on the websites and push them out to employees. So rather than just hitting kind of 50 employees, you can put this out to a much wider audience and still have that personal feel of having the presenter available in the room.
I guess a lot of what we've talked about during the course of this session isn't necessarily about spending more, because I think there's sometimes that perception of to do more around financial well-being, it's about committing more funds into more activity. Sometimes it's actually about surfacing the things that we already do and the things that are perhaps underappreciated or undervalued, or just giving them that platform. You know, going back to that point I made earlier on in terms of different teams being responsible for different aspects of health and well-being, what we tend to see is that the forum for which the information is shared tends to be using the mechanism that they've got control over. So it might not be the right mechanism, but it's just the one that they've got control over, and that's not the most effective outcome for an organisation. So I appreciate this is the first session after lunch, but what I wanted to perhaps do is just take a couple of minutes. I'd like you to think about two things that you currently do within your organisation that you don't feel currently get the traction or the attention that they currently deserve. And then just think about where they're currently housed at the moment. And are they housed in that particular location because it's the right place for them to be housed, or are they housed because it's the people that have been responsible for that have meant that they've been channeled into that space? So I'm not going to spend more than about 2 minutes. If you'd just like to have a think about what those two things are, and perhaps just have a conversation with the people that you're around and next to, just to get a sense of what their thoughts were as well. Okay, I'm always a bit reluctant to break the conversation, having encouraged it. Because I guess that one of the things that I think is particularly valuable from days like today is getting the opportunity to, speak to your peers and understand that actually they're going through similar challenges or similar thought process to yourself. So, I was quite keen to do that, to give you guys the opportunity just to meet someone who perhaps you've not had the chance to speak to. But hopefully what you've probably all articulated is that there are those things within the organisation that perhaps haven't had the attention before because maybe they've not been stored in the best place, or certainly you feel like you put a lot of effort into them and they've not got the level of traction they deserve. I think for us, one of the key things is when we are delivering the content that David talked about and trying to ensure that we're getting that traction, there's a piece around actually measuring its success. So inevitably, when we go and speak to the finance director, there's that whole conversation around ROI and what am I getting from doing this piece of activity. And actually, I guess where we've been able to now start seeing, who is engaging with content and what they're doing with that particular content, it's much easier to begin to articulate. I guess there's a key point for me of you'll have people that will engage with that content and you'll have people who perhaps won't engage with that content, but neither is a lost cause. Each of them perhaps have a different need or a different strategy to approach going forward. So if we think about, the employees who we can see are engaging with the content, what we're quite able to see at that point is we're starting to socially prove that there's an interest in that subject matter. And a survey is a nice way of trying to understand, well, what did that individual get out of that content? What would they like to see in the future? And how can I replicate the success that I've had in that first communication to ensure that when I do it the next time around, it's just as impactful? But for the employees who perhaps haven't engaged with that content, actually there's an opportunity to use the data to be able to approach them, with perhaps a slightly different message, or find a way that maybe garners the attention that you're hoping to achieve that first time around. So again, we tend to work with a number of clients to create some very segmented comms that just, I was going to say attacks, that's not the right word, approaches that particular audience and thinks about, well, why didn't they engage with that content? Was it because it wasn't delivered in a way that they could access? Was it not in a medium that they could see at that particular time? You know, was it just content that wasn't particularly of interest to them and actually they'd like to see something differently? But what that's enabling you to do is giving you the opportunity to reach out to that audience and reinforce that you've done something and actually you're keen to do more. You're keen to work with them and you're keen to build upon that strategy going forward. So, you know, we tend to see that divergence after that first round of communication, just to think about actually how do we build upon it, how do we take it forward. So thinking to the future. I talked about, I guess, the journey that we've been on in terms of the kind of focus on current products, and I think that is something in the past, just simply dropping a product into an employee base, whilst it might get some attention and some focus, ultimately the engagement with that will fall away over a period of time. You need to find a way of ensuring that you get that continued engagement. So, you know, starting to bring it together, starting to wrap that story around, and then I guess I start to talk about the idea of AI. And what it isn't, you know, we're not, all of us in this room aren't suddenly going to be deposed by a breed of new robots that are going to take over. But, you know, if we think about something like Siri, that ability to be able to start surfacing really relevant content to me, perhaps when it's being searched, actually is something that isn't that far away. You know, for us, it's certainly, we've been doing a bit of development work and research, just looking at actually how could you get that personal experience that you might get by going into the office of your HR advisor and actually be able to start surfacing that through the platform. And actually financial wellbeing and health and wellbeing are two areas where you can begin to build up an understanding, you know, perhaps through the initial contacts that you might have through a help desk to build up that bank of responses. So some of the more typical queries in terms of, you know, I want to know more about the cover that I might get because I'm about to go on paternity leave. You know, where can I find out that particular information? Or I'm interested in understanding more about my pension. Whilst we'll try and do as much of that within the platform as we can through links and a really powerful user journey, there's the opportunity to use technology to deliver that in a really meaningful way. So I guess the future for me, you know, is that piece around starting to harness the ability of AI to surface that piece. I think there'll be a journey for most providers to work on in terms of actually getting that bank of really relevant data, because going back to my point earlier on that it's a really personal subject matter, it matters to us or our family or our friends. You can't have a kind of computer says no type piece. It's got to be a really credible response that's coming back. But we can certainly start to see as we look forward that ability to use really powerful rules engines and logic to be able to surface things that are really relevant to me around the subjects that I'm of most interest to. And I guess along that journey, we've then got the data that comes out of it. So at the moment, all we've really got is that activity. You know, have I got employees acquiring those benefits? Have I got individuals looking at those pages? But when we start to get to a place where, you know, you're getting the query data in terms of what people are looking at, you can almost start to move forward in terms of some of the spaces that people have talked around predictive analytics and being able to anticipate some of the challenges that exist within those organisations and hopefully continuing to be more and more proactive. You know, because a lot of what we've spoken about today is just as much about being proactive as it is about reactive, and it's bringing together all of the strands of your health and wellbeing strategy so that ultimately they're joined up, aligned, and all pushing in the same direction. I thank you very much for your time.